Well, folks, we're getting to the end of the trail here. This is the penultimate video. We are now going to start the last book in Plato's Republic, and we'll probably finish it in the next video. The way I normally do these is I like to give my kind of final review of the book at the beginning of the last video. So you can look forward to that in the next video. In that case, I'll kind of give my final esoteric assessment of the book and just kind of spout off for a while about what I think. If you want to prepare for that, go ahead and rewatch the beginning of my Book 6 video. That's where I give my halfway review and tell you what sort of hidden meanings I think might be in this text. But I'll be revisiting that theory tomorrow. So, here we go. Where are we in the story? And it really kind of is a story as much as it is a philosophical thread. So in Book 9, we had the picture of the tyrant completed, and then we had Socrates' final arguments for why the unjust man is unhappy, even if everyone else thinks that he is just. And the reason, he had a bunch of different arguments. It basically boiled down to him being a slave to his own appetites. So if he has this tyrannical soul, he just starts doing whatever he wants, and then he kind of looks like an addict and starts like roaming the street and killing people in order to feed his appetites, because he's been kind of led down the path of destruction by his friends and by his parents, who are not very strict and leave beers in the fridge for him when his friends come over. And he had a few other arguments too about why the philosopher is truly the happiest, saying that the philosopher has experienced other types of pleasure, namely the pleasure of victory, and then these pleasures of profit, as he calls them, which includes pleasures of the flesh, but also just kind of pure money making. So he says the philosopher has experienced more and also just knows more. So the philosopher's measuring stick for truth is argument. And he's argued this whole time that that's just how you get the closest to truth, is through argument, through the dialectic that he's been kind of training us in for the last 9 books. And then he had some kind of weird mathematical arguments about it too, which I didn't really buy. I'll probably be making fun of a little bit in my video tomorrow. But at the end of all of it, it all just comes down to who you're a slave to, and whether you have this human being inside of you that's able to control. Remember this image of the lion and the multifarious beast, or if the beast is in control. And if you have the beast in control, then you're just not going to be a happy person, and you're going to lose all your friends. So I do think it's an interesting turn inward. I think that was the most fascinating part for me. At the very end of Book 9, he said that it doesn't matter if this city ever existed or ever will exist. It's simply to be used as a model for our own kind of internal peace of mind and kind of this internal idea of justice and happiness, which is nice and kind of makes this message more universal, because people can't really control their political circumstances, but they can control themselves or what's going on inside of them. So it almost turns into like the self-help book, which I think is fascinating. So kind of starting with these political questions and then saying, well, why are you so interested in politics, and why are you so interested in making this ideal society? Maybe there's something inside of you that you need to fix first, and then you can turn to these other things. And I don't know, there is a certain resonance in that message for me, because it seems like, especially people get online and start reading headlines and get mad about stuff, and they're just like always angry all the time about politics. Sometimes it's worth asking, like, hold on, why are you really angry here? Is it because you haven't kind of mastered your emotions internally that you're really upset about this? Is it really these external circumstances, which you'll never really know the truth about? And I think that's been a recurring theme here, is that we've had people living inside of these lies. We've had knowledge being extremely inaccessible for the average person. Like, according to Socrates, it's only the philosopher who can escape the cave and begin to contemplate external objects as they are, using the good. And that's just accessible to very, very few people. So to the average person who thinks in images, it's kind of like you are kind of just seeing these shadows on the wall, and you're getting mad about these shadows on the wall, and maybe you'll never know the truth of them, and so maybe you need to turn within first and see if you can get those three elements properly ordered, and so you have your reason in charge of you, and then you can kind of find this inner peace. Yeah, so I don't know. I'll talk more about that in tomorrow's video, but I thought it was just a really fascinating turn of events, kind of this Mario 2 ending, as I called it. So, yeah, that thread is essentially finished, so I'm really curious about Book 10. Like, we don't really have anything else to say about justice, as far as I'm concerned. I think the book is kind of closed on that, so that started in Book 1, and then got us here to the beginning of Book 10. The only real bookend that we had, and I'll be curious if this is where he's going to go, is, remember, Cephalus had no interest in justice. He only had an interest in having a peaceful mind. He said that's the best thing about money, is having a peaceful mind. And he was happy. He kind of was talking about death, talking about old age, talking about impotence, and talking about a little bit about family. And in some ways, those were almost more interesting questions than these abstract ideas of justice, especially now that this sort of just society, Socrates is saying, doesn't really matter if it's there or not. So I'm just talking about that because I will be kind of looking at Book 10 with reference as kind of this potential mirror for Book 1, with all it's like this gigantic justice sandwich. So this is kind of the top piece of bread on the sandwich, and yeah. So I'll be kind of looking at it maybe through Cephalus's eyes, or through the eyes of through the framework of kind of that first narrative structure that we got before we started talking about all this justice stuff. Okay, Book 10. Let's dive right in. Socrates' narration continues. Socrates. You know that there are many other things about our city that make me think we were entirely right in founding it as we did, but I am particularly thinking of poetry when I say that. So I think he really had it in for the poets. He was like, yeah, the poets say this, we need to get rid of all this stuff that they say. They don't know what they're talking about, and they're kind of leading people astray here. In particular, he wanted to make the guardians not fear death anymore. So he's like, okay, all this bad stuff poets say about death, get rid of that ASAP. All right, Glaucon, what about it? Socrates. A refusal to admit any of it that is imitative. Indeed, the need not to admit it seems even more evident in my view, now that we have distinguished the elements in the soul from one another. Okay, so he's kind of revisiting this older argument from Book 4 or something, when he said that we had kind of the narrative poetry and the imitative poetry, and he really had it in for the imitative stuff. Because he's like, well, I don't want any multifarious souls here who can act any part. I know people love actors, but I'd rather have a worse actor kind of espouting an approved message than have one of these guys who can just play anybody. Okay, so yeah, I think that came in with the discussion of the musical education. Glaucon, how do you mean? Between ourselves, for you won't denounce me to the tragic poets, or any of the other imitative ones. I think all such poetry is likely to corrupt the mind of those of its hearers who do not have the knowledge of what it is really like as a drug to counteract it. Okay, so yeah, all right. So he's saying, I think it's which one's the drug? Anyway, poetry corrupts you unless you realize that that's what it's doing. Glaucon, what do you have in mind in saying that? Socrates. I will have to tell you, even though a sort of reverential love I have had for Homer since childhood makes me hesitate to speak. You see, he seems to have been the first teacher and leader of all these fine tragedians. At the same time, a man should not be honored more than the truth. So as I say, I will have to tell you. Okay, we got kind of this final showdown between philosophy and poetry. I like where this is going. Glaucon, of course. Listen then, or rather, answer my questions. Ask away. Could you tell me what imitation in general is? You see, I do not entirely understand what it is supposed to be. Glaucon, so it is likely that I will? Socrates, there would be nothing strange in that, since there are many things the short-sighted see before the sharp-eyed. Or maybe before the far-sighted. People who need reading glasses. Glaucon, that's right. But with you present, I could not possibly be very eager to speak out, even if there were something I saw. So, you will have to do the looking yourself. Socrates. And of course, as I mentioned several times, all of this is kind of funny to me because Plato is doing imitation. Like, he's imitating Glaucon, he's imitating Socrates, and then he's talking about how imitation is bad. So that's kind of one of the long-running ironies in all of this. Okay, Socrates, do you want us to begin our investigation with the following point, then, in accordance with our usual method? I mean, as you know, we usually posit some one particular form in connection with each set of many things to which we apply the same name. Or don't you understand? I'm going to look at the note on this. This looks like... reference to something or other. Okay, but I think it's... We usually... This whole time we've been reasoning about an example and then applying it to the whole class. Glaucon, I do. Socrates, then in the present case too, let's take any set of many things you like. For example, there are, if you like, many couches and tables. Of course. Socrates, but the forms connected to these manufactured items are surely just two, one of a couch and one of a table. Glaucon, yes. Okay, imagine a couch and a table. Don't we usually say, too, that the craftsman who makes each manufactured item looks toward the form when he makes the couches or the tables we use, and similarly with other things? For surely no craftsman makes the form itself. Okay, I think we're getting back to this theory of forms, which we saw in some capacity outside the cave. As we're getting, this is one of the more difficult passages before when he's talking about like true knowledge and belief and opinion and imagination and thinking with images and not with images. So I think we're getting back to that, but in a more accessible way, because I know what a table is. I still don't know what belief is. Okay, so the craftsman looks toward the form. I think this means he looks toward like the ideal couch, and he's kind of doing it. Making a couch that looks like the ideal couch. Glaucon, how could he? Well now, see what you would call this craftsman. Which? The one who makes everything each individual handicraftsman makes. I don't know what he's talking about. That's an amazingly clever man you were talking about. Wait a minute. Is this going to be God or something? And you will have even more reason to say that. You see, this same handicraftsman is able to make not only every manufactured item, but he also makes all the plants that grow from the earth, and produces all the animals, who called it, including himself, and in addition, he produces earth and sky and gods and everything in the sky and everything in Hades beneath the earth. Glaucon, you are talking about a wholly amazing sophist. yeah. That's maybe it is. I think sophist is fascinating there because that's like a rhetorician, or one of these traveling rhetoricians that Socrates hated. But it's the idea that these things are created with language rather than like fashion with your hands. Socrates, you do not believe me. Tell me, do you think such a craftsman is completely impossible? Or do you think there is a way in which a maker of all these things could exist, and a way in which he could not? Don't you see there is a certain way in which even you yourself could make all of them? What way is that? It is not difficult. On the contrary, it is a sort of craftsmanship that is widely available and quick. And quickest of all, I suppose, if you are willing to take a mirror and turn it around in all directions. That way you will quickly make the sun and the things in the sky, or you will quickly make the earth, yourself and the other animals, manufactured items, plants, and everything else that was just mentioned now. Okay, so with this mirror, I think he means, might just be the image of something is indistinguishable from the real thing. So if I just hold up a mirror to it, then in some sense, I made that. Okay, Glaucon, yes, they're appearances, but certainly not the things themselves as they truly are. Socrates, right. You attack the argument at just the right place. For I think the painter is also one of these craftsmen, isn't he? Okay, so I think we're getting on to what imitation is here. Glaucon, of course. But you will say, I think, that he does not make the things he makes as they truly are, even though there's a certain way in which the painter also makes a couch. Isn't that right? Glaucon, yes, he also makes the appearance of one. Okay, painter's just making a picture of a couch. It ain't the couch. This is not a pipe. What about the couch maker? Didn't you just say that he does not make the form, which we say is what a couch is, but only a particular couch? Okay, yeah. Couch maker, you're not making the transcendental couch in the sky. You're just looking up at that, and then you're like, okay, this is what a couch should look like. Glaucon, yes, I did say that. Now, if he does not make what is, he is not making what is, but something that is like what is, but is not. So, if someone were to say that the product of a couchmaker or any other handy craftsman completely is, he probably would not be speaking the truth. Okay, so he's saying just as the painters, like if you paint a couch, then that's just the image of a couch. And in just the same way, if you make a couch, that's just the image of the couch form. Glaucon, that at any rate is what those who occupy themselves with such arguments would think. Socrates, so, we should not be surprised if it also turns out to be somewhat dim in comparison to the truth. No, we should not. Would you like us then to use these same examples to search for that imitator of ours and what he really is? So is this the kind of the great imitator who can imitate anything by like turning the mirror around? Glaucon, I would if you would. Well then, we have these three sorts of couches. I did not think we were going to be talking about couches in Book 10, but I like it. One that is in nature, which I think we would say a god makes. Or is it someone else? Okay, the couch in nature. I don't know if that's like a stone, naturally forming stone couch that is in its nature a couch. Oh boy. See where this goes. No one, I suppose. Socrates, one the carpenter makes. So we got a god makes something that is in its nature a couch. A carpenter makes a couch. And one the painter makes. Isn't that so? So there's the true couch, the imitation couch, and the picture of a couch. You got this. Glaucon, it is. So, painter, carpenter, and god. These three oversee three kinds of couches. Yes, three. Now, the god, either because he did not want to or because it was somehow necessary for him not to make more than one that is in its nature a couch. Okay, there's only one true couch, is what he's saying. Made only the one that is what a couch itself is. Two or more of these have not been naturally developed by the god and never will be naturally developed. Okay, one true couch made by the god. Everything else is an image of that, and then we have images of those images. Glaucon, why is that? Because if he were to make only two, one would again come to light whose form they in turn would both possess, and it would be what a couch itself is, not the two. Glaucon, that's right. Oh man. This is why I see why people get frustrated with this ancient philosophy, because it's just God didn't make a couch. You know, this is all man-made. Couch is just a word. And this is why I recommend, even though I haven't really read Wittgenstein, but I think Wittgenstein really nailed all of this. He says it's all about family resemblances. The only reason two things are called a couch is because in our heads, we think that they're both couches. Like, there's no Platonic definition of a couch. There's no atomic definition that we could all agree on and say, this is a couch and this is not a couch. We will never agree on the strict definition of a couch. We might have legal definitions so that commerce can take place, but philosophically, in terms of a couch form, there's no such thing. It's just, these are just kind of meaningless words here. So I'm going to go through this, but I'm also just kind of rolling my eyes. Okay, Glaucon, that's right. Socrates, the god knew this, I suppose, and, wishing to be the real maker of the real couch, and not just some particular maker of some particular couch, naturally developed the one that is, in its nature, unique? Glaucon, probably so. Would you like to call us to call him its natural maker then, or something like that? Okay, here's more little language tricks from Socrates. Glaucon, it would be right to do so at any rate, since it is by nature that he has made it and all the others. Okay, so the god is making some magical couch, and there's only one of them. Okay, Socrates, what about the carpenter? Shouldn't we call him the craftsman who makes a couch? Glaucon, yes. And should we call a painter too a craftsman and maker of such a thing? Certainly not. In that case, what is it you say he is of a couch? Glaucon, in my view, the most reasonable thing to call him is this. He is an imitator of what the others are craftsmen of. Okay, so we got true craftsman, human craftsman, and then imitator. Socrates hates those imitators. Socrates, all right. So the one whose product is 3 removed from the natural one, you call an imitator. Oh, there's 3 removed again. I wonder if he's going to make a cube out of it. Glaucon, certainly. So the tragedian, too, if he is an imitator, will be someone who is by his nature third from king and truth, and so will all the other imitators. Okay, so I guess we're kind of mapping... Are we mapping the political system to the couch makers now? So, like, the true couch maker is the king, maybe. The carpenter is the timocrat. I don't know what he's doing. I'm going to look at the footnote here. God is called king at laws. Okay. So the God king person. So it's a little easier to swallow than trying to go back to the political hierarchy with the timocracy and the tyranny and all that stuff. Okay, Glaucon, it looks that way. Socrates, we are agreed about the imitator then. Now, tell me this about the painter. In each case, do you think it is what each thing itself is in its nature that he is trying to imitate, or the products of the craftsman? Okay, so yeah, we got the nature maker, then we got the craftsman, and now is the painter, is he working off the original form, or is he working off the particulars? I think that's what he's saying. Those are the craftsmen. Yeah. Socrates, as they are or as they appear to be? You have still to make that distinction. Glaucon, how do you mean? Socrates, this. If you look at a couch, from the side or the front or from anywhere else, does it differ in any way from itself? Or, while not differing at all, does it appear different? And similarly with the others. Glaucon, the latter. It appears different, but is not different at all. Okay, so you're walking around the couch, you get a different image of it each time. And that's, the painter's kind of working from those photon images. Socrates, then consider this very point. At what does painting aim in each case? To imitate what is as it is, or what appears as it appears? Is it an imitation of an illusion or of the truth? Glaucon, of an illusion. Alright, you see what he's saying here is like, if you're painting, you're just looking at, like if I'm going to paint this thing here, I'm just going to try to get this particular angle and see it as I see it, not try to get it the truth. Like, I'm not trying to make like a 3-dimensional asset to put in a video game. I'm just showing you what I see. So it's an imitation of an illusion. Socrates, so, imitation is surely far removed from the truth. And the reason that it produces everything, it seems, is that it grasps only a small part of each thing, and that is an illusion. For example, the painter, we say, can paint us a cobbler, a carpenter, or any other craftsman, even though he knows nothing about these crafts. All the same, if he is a good painter, by painting a carpenter and displaying him at a distance, he might deceive children and foolish adults into thinking it is truly a carpenter. They must have had really good painters in ancient Greece. You know, we only really got their statues and maybe some tiles from Pompeii that were imitations of Greek paintings. It's too bad. If we could fool people into thinking it's a real carpenter at a distance. I'd be impressed. That's better than I can paint. Glaucon, of course. Socrates. In fact, my friend, I imagine that what we must bear in mind in all these cases is this. When someone tells us he has met a human being who knows every craft as well as everything else anyone knows, and that there is nothing of which he does not have a more exact knowledge than anyone else, we should assume we are talking to a naive fellow. Probably a good assumption. He's been deceived, it seems, by an encounter with some sort of sorcerer or imitator, whom he therefore considers to be all-wise. But that is because of his own inability to distinguish between knowledge, lack of knowledge, and imitation. Alright. Yeah, if someone says they know everything, they probably know absolutely nothing. Glaucon, that's absolutely true. Socrates. Well then, we must next consider tragedy and its leader, Homer, since we hear from some that these men know every craft, everything relevant to human virtue and vice, and even all about divine matters. Okay, this is really just serving his Homer vendetta. They claim, you see, that if a good poet is to write beautiful poetry about the things he writes about, he must have knowledge of them when he writes, or else he would be unable to. We should consider, then, whether those who tell us this have been deceived by their encounters with these imitators and do not realize when they see their works that they are 3 removes from what is and are easy to produce without knowledge of the truth. Okay, so what I'm thinking of here is any Hollywood movie that shows a computer hacker and shows a bunch of code going down the screen, or The Matrix. The average person's wow, they must know a lot of computer programming to make all that happen. And then a computer programmer sees it and it's just clearly some really basic thing or just something copy pasted from somewhere, and the programmer kind of laughs. They're like, these movie makers don't know anything about this, but they know enough to fool other people. So he's saying that Homer's doing the same thing when he talks about war, or he talks about, I don't know, being out on the wine-colored ocean or rose-fingered dawn. He's just sort of making this up. He just knows enough to fool people who don't actually know how battles work. And so yeah, so Socrates is kind of mad about this, that everybody thinks Homer knows everything, but he just knows enough to fool everybody else. Okay. For they produce illusions, not things that are. Yeah, Homer, he didn't make an actual chariot. He just made a picture of a chariot. With language, or whether there is something in what they say, and good poets really do have knowledge of the things about which the masses think they speak so well. Glaucon, we must certainly consider that. Socrates, do you think, then, that if someone could make both what is imitated and its image, he would allow himself to take making images seriously and put it at the forefront of his life as the best ability he had? Okay. Glaucon, no, I do not. So maybe it's to get back to the computer programmer in a Hollywood movie, it's if you're an actual programmer and you can make a realistic looking hacking screen for Hollywood, would you consider your highest skill to be actual computer programming or making screens for Hollywood that look like it? And he's saying this, you probably wouldn't put the Hollywood ability. I mean, today you might, but he's saying no, you wouldn't. You wouldn't say your ability to make fake computer programs is your number one skill. Okay, Glaucon, no, I do not. Socrates, but if he truly had knowledge of what he imitates, I suppose he would take deeds much more seriously than their imitations, would try to leave behind many beautiful deeds as his own memorials, and would be much more eager to be the subject of a eulogy than the author of one. Ah, so the eulogy author is kind of the imitator. And this, yeah, I really like this dichotomy between doing the deeds and making the imitations. And it's sort of this eternal dichotomy in human activities. Today, I think it's most relevant as are you a product person or are you on the sales and marketing team? So the marketing team is all about making an image. They're okay, we have a product, but we need to make an image of it to put into people's heads so that they have an image in their head and they come and buy the product and they'll find out later whether it's any good or not. The marketers are not trying to put the true version of the product in people's heads. They just try to put an image of it and hope for the best. And similarly, just this idea of beautiful deeds to make the memorials or being the author of one. There's a lot in a recurring theme in Edward Gibbon's writings in History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, which I've mentioned a few times here, is he often talks about the active life versus the contemplative life. And I think that idea actually comes from Plato, but maybe from a different work. I'm not sure. Maybe like the Symposium or something. But it's just an interesting dichotomy. Like, are you going to try, like, if you're really smart, are you going to go out in the world and try to do great things, or are you going to be the guy who writes about them? Because the only thing people know are the things that people have written about these great things. Like, you could do some great things and no one will ever know, and then is it really a great thing? If it's not perceived, then maybe there's not really any reality to it after you've, forgotten about it or passed on into Hades. So yeah, I don't know what the answer is, and I like it in the context of Gibbon because he's clearly chosen this contemplative life, but you can also see he thinks he's smart enough to like have been a politician. So yeah, I don't know. We're kind of worth thinking about which one you want to do. If you're reading this book, you're probably going to be more contemplative than active, but never too late to change. Glaucon, I suppose so. I mean, these things certainly are not equal either in honor or in benefit. Socrates, let's not demand an account, then, of the other things from Homer or any other poet. Let's not ask if any of them is a doctor or only an imitator of what doctors say, or which people of any of the poets, old or new, has reportedly made healthy as Asclepius did, or which students of medicine he left behind as Asclepius did his sons. And let's not, remember Asclepius? I think he was in book 3 or something. We were doing the triage for something or other. I don't even remember at this point. Have to rewatch that video. And let's not ask them about the other crafts either, but leave them aside. When it comes, however, to the greatest and most beautiful things of which Homer undertakes to speak, warfare, generalship, city government, and a person's education, surely it is fair to question him as follows. My dear Homer, if you are not third removed from the truth about virtue, and are not the sort of craftsman of an image, which is what we define an imitator to be, but if you are even in second place and capable of knowing what practices make people better or worse in private or in public life, tell us which cities are better governed because of you, as the Lacedaemonians are because of Lycurgus, and as many others, great and small, are because of many other men. What city gives you credit for having proved to be a good lawgiver who benefited it? Italy and Sicily give it to Carandus, and we give it to Solon. Who gives it to you? Will he be able to name one? Okay, so it's sort of like saying, I don't know, it's like going up to Aaron Sorkin and being like, all right, Mr. Realistic Dialogue, you wrote The West Wing. Can you name a White House that's better governed because they saw West Wing episodes? Or people who just see movies and just say, like, oh, it's just such a realistic portrayal of, like, the inner politics here or there. It's like, all right, buddy, like, show me how this is, show me anybody who studied this who actually has power. Or is it just people kind of making themselves feel better? It's like, oh yeah, he must, they talk about Shakespeare. One of the cases for, I guess, the Shakespeare authorship controversy, people are like, oh, how could he know what it's like in these, like, inner courts without, if he weren't truly a noble? But the people writing this, it's not like Queen Elizabeth was like, oh my god, this guy must be in my court because this dialogue is so realistic. It's just like professors somewhere who also don't know what it's like to be inside of the court. So you gotta wonder how we actually know that this stuff is useful. Again, I gave the computer programming example. I think politics would be another great example. Like Game of Thrones or something. Oh, it's just so realistic how these power dynamics work out. It's like, well, do you know anything about power dynamics, or are you just someone who writes TV reviews? I don't know. Okay, so Homer apparently is not going to be able to point to a city can say that they they are better off because of him. Or they read his poetry, like, oh man, this changes everything. Let's pass some laws because of Homer. Glaucon. I suppose not. At any rate, not as mentioned even by the Homeridae themselves. Gonna look that up. Footnote number 6. The rhapsodies and poets who recited and expounded Homer throughout the Greek world. That'd be a fun job. Socrates. Then is any war in Homer's time remembered that was well fought because of his leadership or advice? Glaucon. None at all. Then as you would expect in the case of a man wise in deeds, are we told of as many ingenious inventions in the crafts or other activities as we are about Thales of Miletus and Anacharsis of the Scythian? Glaucon. There's nothing of that sort. Then if there's nothing of a public nature, is Homer said to have been a leader during his own lifetime in the education of people who loved associating with him and passed on a Homeric way of life to those who came later? Is he like Pythagoras, who is himself particularly loved for this reason, and whose followers even today still seem to be conspicuous for a way of life they call Pythagorean? Okay, and I guess Pythagoras, was he like an early epicure? I don't remember exactly. What's interesting me here is the idea of Plato as an imitator. So Plato's just imitating Socrates. He's like, oh yeah, Socrates said this, and then Socrates said that. And believe me, Socrates definitely said these things. And that's what a philosopher would say. Now, he's been making fun of Homer for, like, making up how a battle goes, or what a general is saying, or what a general is thinking, or, like, writing these West Wing episodes. Because he's like, Homer didn't actually know this stuff, he was just making it up. And so then the question is, well, does Plato actually know philosophy, or is he just imitating a philosopher? And so, I don't know, maybe this just could be more self-deprecation on Plato's part. I'm not sure. Okay. Glaucon. Again, we're told nothing of the kind. Indeed, Socrates, Creophilus, the companion of Homer, would presumably seem even more ridiculous than his name suggests as an example of such education if the story told about Homer is true. You see, we are told that while he was alive, Creophilus completely neglected him. Okay, I am curious what his name means, or why his name is so ridiculous, so footnote 7, here we come. It derives from two words, creus, meat, and phylon, race or kind. A modern equivalent might be meathead. Thank you, C.D.C. Reeve. That is what I pay the big bucks for. Socrates. Yes, we are told that. But Glaucon, if Homer had really been able to educate people and make them better, if he had been able not to imitate such matters but to know about them, wouldn't he have had many companions who honored and loved him? Protagoras of Abdera, Prodicus of Chios, and a great many others are able to convince anyone who associates with them in private that he wouldn't be able to manage his household or city unless they themselves supervise his education, and they are so intensely loved because of this wisdom of theirs that their disciples do everything except carry them around on their shoulders. Okay, what is this exactly? Okay, if he'd been able to educate people, wouldn't he have had more people? And then he points to two others. Okay. Unless they themselves, their disciples do. Okay, I think he's just saying, why didn't Homer have more disciples? If he's so smart, like that's one way to figure out if somebody knows what they're talking about. Like how many Twitter followers do they have? How many YouTube subscribers do they have? Okay, are we to believe then that if Homer had been able to help people become virtuous, his companions would have allowed either him or Hesiod to wander around as rhapsodes, and wouldn't have clung far tighter to them than to gold and compelled them to come home and live with them? And if persuasion failed, wouldn't they have followed them wherever they went until they had received sufficient education? Yeah, where's your crew, man? Where's your entourage, Homer, if you're so smart? I think what you say is entirely true, Socrates. Socrates. Are we to conclude, then, that all poets, beginning with Homer, imitate images of virtue and of all the other things they write about, and have no grasp of the truth. Although, as we were saying just now, a painter will make what seems to be a shoemaker to those who know as little about shoemaking as he does himself, but who look at things in terms of their colors and shapes. Glaucon, that's right. Although, counterexample would be Leonardo da Vinci, who was like cutting up cadavers to figure out how all the sinews worked, and that made him a better artist. Alright. Socrates. Similarly, I suppose, we will say that the poet uses words and phrases to paint colored pictures of each of the crafts, even though he knows only how to imitate them. So that others like himself, who look at things in terms of words, will think he speaks extremely well about shoemaking or generalship or anything else, provided he speaks with meter, rhythm, and harmony. That is how great a natural spell these things cast. For if a poet's works are stripped of their musical colorings and spoken just by themselves, I think you know what they look like. You have surely seen them. And now this would be another place where I'd wish I knew the Greek and how poetic Socrates was being at different points. He has had a few passages that have been extremely beautifully rendered in English at any rate, and kind of lends this extra authority to what he's saying, just because it is so beautifully done. I remember in particular the people who passed on to Hades having never woken up, and then his great image about the people going through life looking downward at their plates, only feeding and fornicating and fighting. And that seemed like some kind of deliberate poetical devices. Okay, but, oh well, if you know ancient Greek and can answer this question or shed any light on it, leave a comment. Glaucon, I certainly have. Socrates, don't they resemble the faces of those who are young, but not really beautiful, after the bloom of youth has left them? Absolutely. Come on then, consider this. The maker of an image, the imitator, knows nothing, we say, about what is, but only about what appears. Isn't that so? Yes. Then let's not leave the story half told. Let's look at the whole thing. Ooh, where are we going? Go on, says Glaucon. Socrates, a painter, we say, will paint reins in a bit, like the horse harness. Glaucon, yes, but it is the saddler and the blacksmith who make them? Of course. Does the painter know what the reins and bits should be like then? Or do not even their makers, the saddler and blacksmith, know this, but only the one who knows how to use them, the horseman? Okay, so he's saying not even the makers know what a good rein is like or a good bit is like. It's like the blacksmith's like, okay, I can make something that shape. Is this what you want? And then the horseman's like, yeah, close, but not really. Okay, that's absolutely true, says Glaucon. So won't we say the same holds for everything? What? That for each thing, says Socrates, there are these three crafts. One that will use, one that will make, one that will imitate. Okay, another trifecta. Glaucon, yes. Socrates, then aren't the virtue, goodness, and correctness of each manufactured item, living creature, and activity related to nothing but the use for which each is made or naturally developed? Glaucon, they are. Okay, I am kind of familiar with this idea of, I want to say this was developed more by Aristotle, this idea of like excellence. So it's things need to be excellent in what they do, or we evaluate things in terms of their use, which is a little bit easier to comprehend than trying to figure out like the abstract couch or the maker of the natural couch. So like a couch is something that people use as a couch. There's no other way to define it unless you're just talking about some legal definition and have like a couch makers union or whatever. All right, Glaucon, they are. Socrates, so it is entirely necessary then that the user of each thing has the most experience of it, and that he inform the maker about what the good and bad points are in the actual use of the thing he uses. For example, it is the flute player, I take it, who informs the flute maker about which flutes respond well in actual playing, and prescribes how they should be made, while the maker obeys him. Glaucon, of course. Doesn't the one who knows give information, then, about good and bad flutes, whereas the other, by relying on him, makes them? Yes. So, as regards the manufactured item, its maker, through associating with the one who knows and having to listen to the one who knows, has correct belief about its good and bad qualities, while its user has knowledge. Okay, so we're getting back to belief versus knowledge, and here it's the user who has the true knowledge by using it. He's like, this is a good flute, this is a bad flute. I'm a flute player, don't question me. And then it's the maker down here who just has to take the representations of the flute player and hopefully has a correct belief. All right, Glaucon, exactly. Socrates, what about the imitator? Will he, on the basis of using the things he paints, have knowledge of whether they are good or correct or not? Or will he have correct belief through having to associate with the one who knows and being told how he should paint them? Glaucon, neither. Okay, so the painter, he doesn't need to talk to the flute player and be like, is this a good flute or not? It's just like, he doesn't talk to anybody, he just looks at the flute. Socrates, so, an imitator has neither knowledge nor correct belief about whether the things he makes are good or bad. Apparently not. Socrates, how well situated the poetic imitator is, then, in relation to wisdom about the subjects of his poems. Ha 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 ha. The good old sarcastic Socrates, at it again. Glaucon, he isn't really. And yet he will go on imitating all the same, even though he does not know in what way each thing is good or bad. On the contrary, whatever appears good to the masses, who know nothing, that it seems, is what he will imitate. Okay, so, yeah, this has just been a long diatribe against the poets. He seems a little popular of the poets, or a little jealous of the poets' popularity. But he's just like, look, these guys are just popular. It's not because they're finding truth. It's because they make pleasing things that the masses like. Just because you can fill up Madison Square Garden, that doesn't mean you found the ideal rock song. Okay. Glaucon, what else? Socrates. Apparently, then, we are fairly well agreed on the following. That the imitator knows nothing worth mentioning about the things he imitates, but that imitation is a kind of game, not something to be taken seriously, and that tragic poets, whether in iambic or epic verse, are as imitative as they could possibly be. Glaucon, absolutely. Socrates, in the name of Zeus, then, this business of imitation is concerned with what is third removed from truth. Isn't that right? Glaucon, yes. Now then, on which of the elements in a human being does it have its effect? Maybe he's talking about rational, spirited, or appetitive? Glaucon, what sort of element do you mean? Socrates, this sort. The same object, viewed from nearby, does not appear the same size, I presume, as when viewed from a distance. Glaucon, no, it does not. And the same things appear bent and straight when seen in water, or out of it, or concave and convex because sight is misled by colors. And every other similar sort of confusion is clearly present in our soul. Ooh, we can't see anything straight. It is because it exploits this weakness in our nature that illusionist painting is nothing short of sorcery, and neither are jugglery or many other similar sorts of trickery. Yeah, don't trust those jugglers. Glaucon, true. And haven't measuring, counting, and weighing proved to be most welcome assistance in these cases, ensuring that what appears greater or smaller or more numerous or heavier does not rule within us, but rather what is calculated or measured or even weighed. Thank you, Department of Weights and Measures. Glaucon, of course. And that is the task of the soul's rational element. Yes, of it. But quite often, when it is measured and indicates that some things are greater or smaller than others, or the same size, the opposite simultaneously appears to hold of these same things. Okay. Yeah, okay, so your reason says one thing, and then your vision says something else. It's kind of like, I don't know, it's like all the ice cream tubs. They started, like, they make them look big by making them tall, but they really hold less than the squat ones sometimes. You know what I'm talking about. They're now down to like 1.75 quarts or 1.5 quarts. It's a travesty. Glaucon, yes. Socrates. And didn't we say that it is impossible for the same thing to believe opposites about the same thing at the same time? Did we say that about pleasure and pain? I don't remember. Glaucon, yes, and we were right to say it. So, the element in the soul that believes contrary to the measurements and the one that believes in accord with the measurements could not be the same. Okay, so this is just like saying your vision is not the same as your reason when you think that the Gateway Arch in St. Louis is taller than it is wide. It's not. Glaucon, no, they could not. Socrates. But the one that puts its trust in measurement and calculation would be the best element in the soul. And gotta have reason in charge. It's been a recurring theme. Glaucon, of course. So the one that opposes it would be one of the inferior parts of us. Necessarily. That, then, was what I wanted to get agreement about when I said that painting and imitation as a whole are far from the truth when they produce their work. And moreover, that imitation really consorts with an element in us that is far from wisdom, that nothing healthy or true can come from their relationship or friendship. Okay, so imitation kind of appeals to the non-rational element in the soul, I think is all he is saying here. And that's you can't trust poetry, you can't trust your eyes when it comes to these things. And I kind of come back to aesthetics. It's just I don't know. It's like you get an image of people's perfect lives from Facebook or Instagram, but there's no measurement there. You're not measuring their resting heart rate. You're not measuring their expected life. It's just here's some pictures. We want the non-rational element in you to perceive something and think something. Yeah, where's my Facebook for reason? Still waiting for it. Glaucon, that's absolutely right. Socrates. So, imitation is an inferior thing that consorts with another inferior thing to produce inferior offspring. So it seems. Socrates, does this apply only to the imitation that is visible, or also to the one that is audible, the one we call poetry? He's going to spend this entire book on poetry. Glaucon, it probably applies to that as well. Well, let's not rely solely on a probable analogy with painting. Instead, let's also go directly again to the very element in our mind with which poetic imitation consorts, and see whether it is inferior or excellent. Yes, we should. Then, let's put it as follows. Imitative poetry, we say, imitates human beings acting under compulsion or voluntarily who, as a result of these actions, believe they are doing either well or badly and so experience either pain or enjoyment in all these situations. Does it imitate apart from these things? What? Okay, poetry is imitating human beings acting under compulsion or voluntarily, acting well or badly, and experience pain. Okay, this is just everything that happens in a play is covered by those 8 situations. Okay, Glaucon, not a thing. So, is a human being of one mind in all these circumstances then? Or just as in the case of visible representation, where he was split into factions and had opposite beliefs in him about the same things at the same time, is he also split into factions and at war with himself in matters of action? But I am reminded that there is really no need for us now to reach agreement on this question. You see, in our earlier arguments, we were sufficiently agreed about all that when we said that our soul is filled with myriad opposites of that sort at the same time. Okay, so is it the case in poetry? Is it just like the ice cream jug that we think holds more ice cream than it actually does? Do we do that with audible poetry? And then are we going to be split into factions and at war with himself in matters of action? I'm not sure what the matters of action concern. Yeah, I'm not sure about that unless it's going back to kind of that contemplative and active life, or doing beautiful deeds versus writing beautiful elegies. I'm going to look at the footnote here just because I'm a little lost. Nope, not helpful. Glaucon, and rightly so. Let's just keep going. Socrates, yes, it was right. But we omitted something then that I now think we must discuss. Okay, so I think he's just saying we're agreed that we have myriad opposites in our soul, and that's what those three, the lion and the human and the multi-headed beast, are all about. Okay, what's that? When a good man suffers some stroke of bad luck, such as the loss of a son or something else he values very highly, we also said in our earlier arguments, as you know, that he will bear it more easily than others. Okay, when a good man bears it more easily. And that must be book 1. That was a long time ago. Huh. Glaucon, we certainly did. Socrates, now let's consider this. Will he not grieve at all? Or since that is impossible, will he be somehow measured in the face of pain? Glaucon, the latter is probably closer to the truth. Now tell me this about him. Do you think he will be more likely to fight and resist pain when he is seen by his equals, or when he is just by himself in a solitary place? Glaucon, he's sure to fight it far more when he is being seen. Yeah, don't cry in public, not a good look. Socrates, but when he is alone, I imagine, he will venture to say many things he would be ashamed if someone else heard, and to do many things he would not want anyone else to see him doing. That's right. And isn't it reason and law that tell him to resist, while what urges him to give in to the pains is the feeling itself? Okay, so I guess he's kind of equating social custom with reason. So it's like, okay, you want to cry it out, but you know our society expects you to man up and not cry about anything. So that's the battle going on with him. Glaucon, true. And when there are opposite impulses in a human being in relation to the same thing at the same time, we say that there must be two elements in him. Of course. Isn't one part ready to be persuaded? Yeah, that was his whole proof before about, like, there must be, when he's talking about the division of the soul. He's like, let's prove that there are 3 parts of the soul here. And we're going to prove that because these different parts are doing different things or want different things. Like, your appetitive element wants to count chocula, but your rational element knows you're going to regret it. Okay, isn't one part ready to be persuaded to follow the law wherever the law leads? Can you explain how? Socrates, the law says, as you know, that it is best to keep as quiet as possible in misfortunes, and not get irritated, since what is really good or bad in such things is not clear. Yeah, maybe it's all for the best. There is nothing to be gained by taking them hard, nor is any aspect of human affairs worth getting very serious about. Yeah, man, that's kind of the ultimate nihilist view. It's like, yeah, okay, I could be upset, but all this human stuff doesn't matter anyway. It's a big universe out there. It's not going to miss me. And the very thing whose aid we need as quickly as possible in such circumstances is the one our grieving hinders. Very aid. I'm not sure what the very thing whose aid we need. What? I don't know what that is. Now, which one do you mean? Says Glaucon. The capacity to deliberate about what has happened, and as with the fall of the dice, to arrange our affairs given what has befallen us in whatever way reason determines would be best. Instead of acting like children who have fallen over and who hold on to the hurt part and spend their time wailing, we should always accustom our souls to turn as quickly as possible to curing and raising up the part that has suffered a fall and is sick, so as to banish lamentation by means of medicine. Okay, like, take some antidepressants and get over it, bud. Get back to work. Glaucon, that would be the most correct way to deal with bad luck anyway. Socrates, so it is the best element, we say, that is willing to follow this rational calculation. Clearly. As for the part that leads us to recollections of our suffering and to lamentations, and is insatiable for these things, won't we say that it is the element that lacks reason, is idle, and is a friend of cowardice? This is being harsh on, like, showing your emotions, man. You gotta cry it out, bro. It's okay. Don't be ashamed. This is a safe place. Glaucon, we certainly will. Now this element, the one that gets irritated, admits of much complex imitation, whereas the wise and quiet character, which always remains pretty much self-same, is neither easy to imitate nor easy to understand when imitated, especially not at a festival where multifarious people are gathered together in theaters. Ah, we hate those multifarious people. For the experience being imitated is alien to them. Okay, so we got the wise and quiet guy who's just like, I think he's just kind of Mr. Serious. He's like, I'm not an actor, and you can't imitate me. This element that gets irritated. Is it the rational one that is getting irritated at the insatiable one? Oh no. The one that gets irritated emits a much complex imitation. Okay, so there's something inside you that wants to cry, and there's like the stoic inside you that doesn't want to. So he's saying it's easy to imitate the crying guy, because all the actors are like, oh yeah, I can cry on demand, but it's a lot harder to like play a stoical character, I guess, and to like exude that gravitas. Maybe, I don't know. Oh yeah, before the experience being imitated is alien to them. Okay, so the actors are like crying all the time, so they know how to cry. But when it comes to being a stoic, they don't know how to be a stoic. If they were stoics, they wouldn't be actors. I think that's what he's saying there. Glaucon, absolutely. Socrates, the imitative poet then clearly does not naturally relate to this best element in the soul. I actually love this argument. And his wisdom is not directed to pleasing it. Not if he is going to attain a good reputation with the masses, but to the irritable and complex character, because it is easy to imitate. Yeah, he's almost saying like, okay, look, just by your nature, because you're a poet, you're probably easily given over to tears and crying, and you don't know how to like man up. Like you couldn't write a good general, because you don't know how to be like. You don't know how to be one. You're gonna like have some like crybaby general instead, or you just, And here, general, I'm just talking about a like manly man who doesn't express any emotion. Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting criticism. It's the one that's like hard for the poet to escape, because Socrates is just kind of saying it's sort of like the philosopher saying that remember the victory-loving guy and the profit-loving guy. He's like, I know your pleasures, but you don't know mine. And there's like, but well, Socrates is doing the same thing to the poets. He's like, yeah, I know you're kind. I got that in me too, but I keep it under control. You can't keep yours under control. You don't know what it's like to be me. You'll never be able to write me in imitative poetry. Son of Ariston. All right, Glaucon, clearly Socrates. So, it would at last be right to take him and place him beside the painter as his counterpart. For he is like the latter in producing things that are inferior as regards truth, and is also similar to him in associating with the other element in his souls, not with the best one. Okay, so I think at some level, it's like the poet, because the poet doesn't know what it's like to be a stoic, he can only like make words about what he sees about the person without actually feeling the inside. Similarly, the painter just knows what a shoe looks like. He doesn't know how to make a shoe. He doesn't know what makes a good shoe. He's just like, yeah, I know where the colors and shapes go. Okay. So we would also at last be justified in not admitting him into a city that is to be well governed. Yeah, all right, getting back to the ideal city. No poets allowed. You see, he arouses and nourishes this element in the soul, and, by making it strong, destroys the rational one. Just as someone in a city who makes wicked people strong by handing the city over to them ruins the better ones. Similarly, we will say an imitative poet produces a bad constitution in the soul of each individual by making images that are very far removed from the truth, and by gratifying the element in it that lacks understanding and cannot distinguish greater from smaller, but believes the same things to be now large, now small. This is like Netflix is ruining the world. Everybody's just getting their truth from Game of Thrones and The Office and whatever. And he's saying these guys don't know anything about the true world. They've just persuaded people based on their compelling images and slick dialogue. Glaucon, he does indeed. Yeah, no Netflix in the ideal city. It is so ordered. But we haven't yet brought our chief charge against imitation, says Socrates. For its power to corrupt all but a very few good people is surely an altogether terrible one. Oh, the chief charge. Here it comes. Glaucon, it certainly is, if it really can do that. Socrates, listen and consider. When even the best of us hear Homer, or some other tragic poet, imitating one of the heroes in a state of grief, and making a long speech of lamentation, or even chanting and beating his breast, you know we enjoy it and give ourselves over to it. We suffer along with the hero and take his suffering seriously. And we praise the one who affects us most in this way as a good poet. Of course I know. But when one of us suffers a personal loss, you also realize we do the opposite. We pride ourselves that we are able to keep quiet and endure it, in the belief that is what a man does, whereas what we praised before is what a woman does. Glaucon, I do realize that. Is praise of that sort rightly bestowed, then? Is it right to look at the sort of man we would be, not honored, but rather ashamed to resemble, and instead of being disgusted by what we see, to enjoy and praise it? Okay, you go to the movies, or you go to the play, and some guy has some kind of loss and is crying and lamenting and giving this long speech. I'm like, wow, what a powerful play. But he's saying, no, you shouldn't be imitating that guy. You should just suck it up. Like, we should be praising the guy who just sucks it up. Doesn't say anything. Probably wouldn't make a very good play, but there you go. Glaucon, no, by Zeus, that does not seem reasonable. Yes, it does, says Socrates, at least if you look at it in the following way. How? This might be... Socrates very seldom just directly refutes somebody, or just contradicts them. Like, no, it doesn't. Yes, it does. Explain yourself, Socrates. If you reflect as follows. What is forcibly kept in check in our personal misfortunes and as an insatiable hunger for weeping and lamenting, since that is what it has a natural appetite for, is the very factor that gets satisfaction and enjoyment from the poets. Okay, is this the complex, irritable part again? Secondly, our naturally best element, since it has not been adequately educated by reason or habit, relaxes its guard over the lamenting one, since it is watching the sufferings of somebody else, and thinks there is no shame involved for it in praising and pitying another purportedly good man who grieves excessively. Okay, is this... At first I thought it was like the two elements looking at each other, but it might be... You're looking at... Yeah, you're watching the sufferings of somebody else. So I think, yeah, this is when you're going to the play or listening to the poem. Okay. Yeah, you see a man suffering, he's grieving, you feel bad for him, you don't feel ashamed of that. On the contrary, it thinks that to be a clear prophet, I mean the pleasure it gets. And it would not want to be deprived of it by despising the whole poem. You see, I think only a few people are able to calculate that the enjoyment of other people's sufferings is inevitably transferred to one's own, since when pity is nourished and strengthened by the former, it is not easily suppressed in the case of one's own sufferings. Okay, I think he's saying if you enjoy these poems, then it's going to make you want to cry more when you have a loss. I think that's what he means. Of it. Because you're transferring their sufferings, and then pity is being nourished and strengthened. It is not easily suppressed in the case of one's own sufferings. Yeah, I think it's kind of loosening you up, so you can cry it out a little more, which is not what a man does, not in this society. Glaucon, that's absolutely true. Socrates, doesn't the same argument also apply to humor? You see, if there are jokes you would be ashamed to tell yourself, but that you very much enjoy when you hear them imitated in a comedy, or even in private, and that you don't hate as something bad, aren't you doing the same as with the things you pity? For the element in you that wanted to tell the jokes, but which you held back by means of reason, because you were afraid of being reputed a buffoon, you now release. And having made it strong in that way, you have been led unawares into becoming a comedian in your own life. Okay, is this saying it's like... Maybe there are certain YouTube channels you like to watch secretly. You think you're really funny, but you don't want anybody else to know that you watch them, or you don't want to repeat any jokes from them. So I think he's saying the element that wanted to tell the jokes, held back by reason, you now release that element. And you've been, having made it strong in that way, you've been led unawares into becoming a comedian in your own life. Yeah. So it's like, just because you're watching that YouTube channel and laughing at it and nobody knows, it's like changing something in you. And it's making something stronger in you that does enjoy that humor, even though you feel like you're not allowed to enjoy it. Okay, Glaucon, exactly. And in the case of sexual desires, anger, and all the appetites, pains, and pleasures in the soul which we say accompany every action of ours, the effect of poetic imitation on us is the same. I mean, it nurtures and waters them when they should be dried up, and establishes them as rulers in us when, if we are to become better and happier rather than worse and worse and more wretched, they should be ruled. Okay, so I guess he's saying these poems kind of arouse sexual desire and anger and appetites, and the ruler, the human being in us, is trying to like keep these under control, but the poet is like bringing them back up. You're watching that Game of Thrones. So he's saying, it's making you a worse person. Glaucon, I cannot disagree with you. In that case, Glaucon, when you meet admirers of Homer, who tell us that this is the poet who educated Greece, and that for the management of human affairs and education in them, one should take up his works and learn them and live guided by this poet in the arrangement of one's whole life, you should befriend and welcome them, since they are the best they are capable of being. And you should agree that Homer is the most poetic of the tragedians and the first among them. Nonetheless, be aware that hymns to the gods and eulogies of good people are the only poetry we can admit into our city. For if you admit the honeyed muse, whether in lyric or epic poetry, pleasure and pain will be kings in your city, instead of law, and the thing that has always been generally believed to be best, reason. Ooh, this is good. This is good. Yeah, and it's sort of like the proliferation of novels in the, 18th, 19th centuries. It's just like people could not get enough of these, and then they're just getting really excited because there's kind of a lot of sex in novels, and I think that's what like people got excited for. And he's saying like if you don't watch out, that will be the king. The people won't listen to you. They listen to their novelists and their poets and their artists, and that's, you might have a hard time like keeping control of the city. So only hymns to gods and eulogies of good people will be allowed. Okay. Glaucon, that's absolutely true. Let that, then, be our defense for our return to the topic of poetry, which shows that, given her nature, we were right to banish her from the city earlier, since our argument compelled us. And that argument was a little weirder, at least with the actors. It's like, oh, everybody just needs to do their own job, and this guy's doing a lot of jobs by imitating people. But let's also tell her, in case we are charged with some harshness and boorishness, that there is an ancient quarrel between poetry and philosophy. For such expressions as the bitch yelping at its master, and howling, and great in the empty eloquence of fools, and control by a mob of the omni-wise, and the subtle thinkers who are beggars all, and countless others are signs of this old opposition. All the same, let it be said that, if the imitative poetry that aims at pleasure has any argument to show it should have a place in a well-governed city, we would gladly welcome it back, since we are well aware of being charmed by it ourselves. Still, it is not pious to betray what one believes to be the truth. What about you, my friend? Aren't you also charmed by it, especially when it is through Homer that you look at it? Okay, so it's kind of poetry versus truth, and he's saying truth is on the side of the philosophers. And it's interesting, I guess what I'm wondering about, because we're kind of banning it from the city because it conjures up basically all these appetites. But we're still allowing it for these eulogies or hymns to God and eulogies of good people. So poetry does have this propaganda use. And so I'm kind of curious about it in relation to this noble lie or magnificent myth, because it seems like it'd be kind of useful. Or also just maybe we want it to control people's feelings. Maybe it could be used as this control mechanism. And I think that sort of aspect gets fleshed out a little more in Brave New World, which uses all possible drugs and I guess actually no, I think they had poetry was banned there, except they had some guys write rhymes that like were used for the mind programming. So yeah, check out the Brave New World series here on the channel sometime for an interesting follow up and complement to Plato's Republic. But yeah, I love this part where he's being reasonable. He's like, yeah, but I'm charmed by it. So if you guys can like, the door is open if you want to try to make your plead your case. We're not banning you forever, but we think the cons outweigh the pros here of letting you in. Okay, Glaucon, very. Isn't it just then for her to re-enter in that way when she has defended herself in lyric or some other meter? Ah. So you're saying you can come back in and you can plead your case in poetry, because we're just human here. We're charmed by that. And he's saying that would be the just thing. So you don't have to, it's not going to be like this bureaucratic form of like, what benefits do you bring to our city? And like, it's not like a grant application. It's like you're going to send them the mixtape or the demo tape and try to persuade them that way. Like, look, this city needs this music. Okay. Glaucon, yes indeed. Maybe this will cause the collapse of the city, I don't know. Then we will surely allow her defenders, the ones who are not poets themselves, but lovers of poetry, to argue without meter on her behalf, showing that she gives not only pleasure, but also benefit both to constitutions and to human life. Such an interesting passage. Indeed, we will listen to them graciously, since we would certainly profit if poetry were shown to be not only pleasant, but also beneficial. How could we fail to profit? Yeah, because if just letting the poet argue in poetry, then it's like Socrates, as the philosopher king, is sort of letting his non-rational element make a decision here. And we sort of had that before. You remember Socrates got angry. I said that was a key moment when Socrates got angry about people denigrating philosophy. And he's like, that just works me up so much when you say that philosophers are bad, but, I should get a hold of myself here. Seems like another kind of human moment where Socrates is like, yeah, I do like poetry too. I'll listen to you, and you can use poetry on me to plead your case. Socrates, but if it is not, my dear comrade, we will behave like men who have fallen in love. If they do not believe their passion is beneficial, hard though it is, they nonetheless stay away. And we too, because of the passion for this sort of poetry implanted in us by our upbringing in those fine constitutions, are well disposed to have her appear in the best and truest light. But as long as she is not able to produce such a defense, then whenever we listen to her, we will chant to ourselves the argument we just now put forward as a counter-charm to prevent us from slipping back into the childish passion that the masses have. Like, okay, poetry's bad, poetry's bad, poetry's bad, poetry's bad. For we have come to see that such poetry is not to be taken seriously as a serious undertaking that grasps truth, but that anyone who listens to it should be careful, if he is concerned about the constitution within him, and should believe what we have said about poetry. Glaucon, I completely agree. It is a great struggle, my dear Glaucon, greater than people think, to become good rather than bad. So we must not be tempted by honor, money, or any sort of office whatever, not even by poetry, into thinking that it is worthwhile to neglect justice and the rest of virtue. So it's like it's pure reason that's got to lead us to justice and virtue here, because all these other things are going to lead us away into things like love. Like, we got to think of the greater good here, honey. Sorry, Glaucon. I agree with you on the basis of what we have said, and so I think would anyone else. Socrates. And yet the greatest rewards of virtue and the prizes proposed for it have not been discussed. Shouldn't it be a reward in itself? Glaucon, you must have something incredibly great in mind if it is greater than those already mentioned. Socrates, in a short period of time could anything really great come to pass? I mean, the entire period from childhood to old age is surely short when compared to the whole of time. Ain't that the truth? Glaucon, it's a mere nothing. And this is kind of getting, I said I wanted to look at Book 10 with reference to the first half of book 1 before we started talking about justice. We were talking Cephalus, talking about sex, talking about death. This is kind of getting us back to death. Socrates, well then, do you think an immortal thing should be seriously concerned with that period rather than the whole of time? An immortal thing? Uh-oh. Glaucon, I suppose not, but what exactly do you have in mind by that? Socrates, haven't you realized that our souls are immortal and never destroyed? Uh-oh. Time for a new argument. He looked at me in and said in amazement, no, by Zeus, I have not. But are you really in a position to assert that? Socrates, I certainly ought to be, and I think you are too. There's nothing difficult about it. Glaucon, there is for me, so I would be glad to hear from you about this non-difficult topic. Yeah, the immortality of the soul. That's easy to prove. Socrates, listen then. Glaucon, all you have to do is speak. Okay, I'm going to cut the video there. I think we're about halfway through book 10. Seems like a good stopping point. We've completely discussed the subject of poetry and imitation, and we get to look forward to the immortality of the soul in the very last video. Seems appropriate. Yeah, so he started talking about just the nature of imitation, and we have start with a couch maker, and there being 3 couch makers, the nature of like the one true couch, and then the maker of couches, and then the painter of couches, and then we started talking more about the painter and how he doesn't even paint the couch or a couch. He just paints an angle of a couch, and he doesn't know what's going on inside the couch. All this just seemed to be to make fun of the painter, or prove that the painter is just so far removed from truth and knows nothing at all, is just putting colors and shapes onto the canvas. And then similarly, this is all in the service of attacking the poets. And he doesn't even just say, okay, well, we'll just say it's a strict analogy to poetry. He just really dives into what poetry does and talks about the emotions that it brings up and how we can't have those because those might weaken us and bring out parts in us that we don't want to be nurturing in our ideal city. And then at the end, he's got this really interesting bit about the poets pleading their case for the city. So he realizes he can be charmed by poets, but he's just so disposed against them because of the effects that they can have. And really, he just seems so mad that the poets aren't truthful. They don't know the truth, and he just spends all this time talking about how they really, just because they describe a general, just because you wrote an episode of West Wing, doesn't mean you know anything about politics. And he seems kind of almost like he has a chip on his shoulder about this. I guess the poets were just regarded as the smartest people in the society, and so he's got to kind of attack Homer. That's who he's up against. And I love this idea of this great intellectual rivalry between Homer and Plato, and them just kind of I would say trying to one up each other. Homer's dead by this point, so he can't really do one more. But I don't know why I thought of this, but if you watch any videos from Red Letter Media about Star Wars and James Cameron, it's George Lucas and James Cameron had this big rivalry in the 90s. So James Cameron comes out with Titanic, and George Lucas kind of has a chip on his shoulder about Titanic. He's like, well, we're doing the Star Wars, but we'll never beat Titanic, but we'll try to do pretty well with our prequels. And they're both guys who are really big into computer graphics and technology. And then Star Wars prequels come out and blow everything else out of the water. And then James Cameron has to come back with Avatar. He's like, I'm going to show that George Lucas. I can do what he does, but I can do it even better, and in 3D. So I don't know. It's just interesting for me to see people who are kind of at the top of their profession or industry still worried about the competition, because you still have a lot of people, successful people, be like, oh, don't think about the competition, just focus on your art. But then you look at some of these guys who are just yeah, you're still obsessed. You're obsessed with the competition there. Plato, you just can't let Homer go. You've been ripping on this guy this entire book, and trying to install yourself as king here. Yeah, so I don't know. It's kind of interesting here. I'm not extremely interested in it, I guess. We've gotten some more discussion about this theory of forms. Kind of hard to prove that it's true. It just seems like it's all language to me when it comes down to it. But I do kind of like seeing this, like Socrates' psychology. Particularly, I think the most interesting thing to me was him admitting that he has a weakness for poetry and will allow the poet to plead their case, but he's got to like keep repeating to himself like poetry's bad, poetry sucks. I don't need it. Not in the ideal city. Get that poetry away from me. So I like that, just like tension and sort of humanization of Socrates that we've only seen a couple times before. All right, that's all I'm going to say about this. Hope you're enjoying it so far. If you have anything to say about Book 10, leave a comment down below. Start a discussion. Any parts in particular that you liked or confused you or whatnot, I'd love to hear about it. And otherwise, see you tomorrow. It's going to be the last video. Get excited, and like I said, check out the beginning of Book 6 again if you want a little refresher. See ya.